and gentlemen, I sit here with you once again in my 34 square meters of glorious gym empire, ready to answer all your questions and drink schnapps. Hopefully more questions than schnapps. It might not be good for my health otherwise. Before I answer any questions, I'm going to ask you guys one. ALPS, the Aesthetic Linear Progression to Swole, the novice program that we've been using here at the gym. Who would be interested in seeing a series of instructional videos on that, covering everything from sleep, cardio, basic daily cardio, food, through to the particular lifts and their variants that we like to use and how they progress over time. We could produce these, it would take some time and some effort, so we hope that there would be an audience for them. Let us know if you would be interested. Okay, the first question tonight comes from Emmanuel, who asks, from a programming point of view, what's the difference between bodybuilding and powerlifting? Well, Manny, in the first couple of years, no difference at all. The beginner who wants to be a powerlifter is going to have to get stronger, which will involve putting on some muscle. The beginner who wants to be a bodybuilder is going to have to put on some muscle, which will involve getting stronger. In both cases, doing the big lifts, which maximally stimulate the body to get stronger and bigger, is going to be of benefit to that beginner. So for the first couple of years, it makes no difference. They need to squat, press, deadlift, chin-ups, flat bench press, barbell row, farmer's walks, all those sorts of things. And just generally get stronger, eat a whole load of food, and add some muscle to their frame. Where it changes is later on down the track. Whereas a bodybuilder doesn't really care if they have a 120 kilogram bench press compared to a 140 kilogram bench press, but they care deeply about the size of their pectoral muscles. So they will aim for a body which has certain ideals of symmetry based on the powerlifting federation that they're going for. And so they'll still have the basic compound exercises, but they won't be pushing the heaviness of weights. They'll tend to go for a higher volume of training, lots and lots of reps, to maximally stimulate the muscles to grow, and they will be more likely to do isolation exercises, the curls and wrist curls and calf raises and all that sort of stuff, because they care about how big their biceps are compared to their triceps, whereas the powerlifter just says, yeah, but what's going to help me lift more weight? So the base is the same, but over time they start diverging from each other. They still remain fairly closer than is commonly supposed. But the base is the same, and most of the people that we're talking to don't have the base yet. He asks too, your take on ecto, meso, endomorphs, and how does this influence your training of them? So for those who don't know, in the 19th century, there was a theory called phrenology, that the shape of your head determined your personality and intelligence, indeed. And the phrenologists did many studies, and they tried to show that a particular head shape would lead to the person being more intelligent, less intelligent, more extroverted, less extroverted, or even criminal. The problem with this theory was that it was complete and utter bollocks. The whole ecto, meso, endomorph thing, theory of training, is basically the phrenology of the body. The theory is that ectomorphs are narrower bone structure, narrower frames, smaller and leaner, more kind of excitable and of nervous disposition. And the endomorphs with a larger frame were more laid back, ate more, tended to a more placid, sanguine disposition, and the mesomorphs were somewhere in between. This theory too is bollocks. What we do see is a difference in frame sizes. One of the guys who comes here, my old friend Aaron, he's a great comparison to me because we're the same height, yet you put us back to back and he just has broader shoulders. You put our wrists next to each other and his are just thicker. So I float around at a healthy body weight of the high 70s kgs or the low 80s, which technically puts me in the overweight BMI category, but since I lift weights and I'm physically active and go for runs and things, I'm not terribly worried about that. But if Aaron were my height, my weight, he would just be a stick. The last time he was a weight like that was when he was recovering from cancer. Likewise, if I were his body weight, I'd either have to be a juiced up steroid freak or I'd just be obese. So there are different frame sizes. Now, the person with a larger frame will tend to have a larger, healthy body weight. This person will tend to be able to start with a heavier weight in the gym. They will tend to be able to put on muscle more quickly because they've just got a larger frame. So an even coating of muscle across a larger area is going to be more muscle than a smaller area. So if your bone structure is bigger, you're just going to be more muscular and stronger than a person who's smaller. That's just the way it is. Now, does it influence training? Well, the bigger guys, as I said, tend to be able to start with heavier weights. The big guys, all girls, tend to be able to start with heavier weights, and they tend to get more out of the same training going a bit further earlier on. So if you get two women of the same height, one of whom's a small frame and the other of whom's a large frame, one might finish her novice progression with a 60 kilogram back squat and the other with a 100 kilogram back squat. So you just kind of expect more of the bigger ones. But the bigger ones also will be prone to putting on more fat. It will be easier for them to become obese because the amount of eating they need to do to sustain their larger frame will also, some of it will turn into body fat. So they have to watch what they eat a bit more carefully than the smaller frame person. Though of course a smaller frame person, if they try hard, can also get fat. So, but in terms of sets and reps and exercise chosen, it doesn't really make a difference. It's just their starting weight and how quickly they can progress early on. Though some of the bigger ones can get away with less volume than the smaller ones, because the smaller ones have got less to start with, so they've just kind of got to pound it to be able to make it grow, and it's just the way it is, unfortunately. McCarver asks about ankle stiffness, improving dorsiflexion for squats. She mentioned that her ankle has become stiffer lately. Well, in the case of McCarver, I know that she's been sick for a number of weeks with a couple of bad illnesses and has squatted less. What we find for most people is that simply doing the warm-up sets is enough mobility work for them to be able to perform their squat, their press, their clean or whatever. Just going through the warm-up sets. So you work through a full range of motion, or the fullest possible range of motion, and as the load goes up and your body gets warmed up, you're able to go through a fuller range of motion until you can reach the fullest possible range of motion. The exception for mobility work is when somebody has something else in their life making them super stiff. So the classic one is the guy who spends a lot of time sitting at a desk, maybe hunched over. That person can benefit from things like foam rolling their upper back. Because as much as they train 3 hours a week in the gym versus 40 hours a week sitting at a desk, the desk is going to win, unfortunately. So they may need to do some extra mobility work. Most people don't need it. Now in Makava's case, as I mentioned, she had a couple of weeks being sick, so she wasn't squatting. So now she comes back to it and finds that she's stiffer than she was before. I would suggest that over the next couple of weeks you'll find things loosen up again. That's, you know, once you're back into regular training, things work again the way they're supposed to. But if you really need an ankle mobility exercise, the simplest one is to get down on the ground in a lunge kind of position with one knee on the ground and the other foot forward, and to lean forward, push forward with the knee on that ankle until the foot's just about to come off the floor, and stop there. And then come back. Do that a few times, and then also when you go forward, come around in a kind of a circle with that knee. Again, without lifting that foot off the ground. This will loosen it up a wee bit and may help. James asked, is there a way to know the optimal training volume of an individual, or is it trial and error? Well, if you mean optimal in terms of the quickest possible gains, as I've said before, programming is not usually the limitation. Okay, whether you're doing sets of 5 or sets of 10, whether you're squatting once a week or 5 times a week or whatever, that's not usually the limitation. The limitation is usually how much of your life are you willing to give to your performance. On a in another fitness group that I'm in, a guy linked to some coach, a cycling coach, talking about how it's the 80-20 rule in cardio stuff, that about 80% of what you do should be at a pretty light to moderate intensity. You're just putting in the miles rather than smashing yourself, and you'll get better progress that way compared to smashing yourself multiple times a week. It's counterintuitive, but that's the way it is. Anyway, that guy mentioned that normally with a training program you look for an improvement in VO2 max, that's the volume of oxygen the person can get in through their body, which is one of the measures of cardiovascular fitness. Normally we look for a VO2 max improvement of 10 to 15%. That's about as much as we can get. And he mentioned that one of his guys had got a 40% improvement, but 25% was more typical. Well, the first thing is that VO2 max is in proportion to your body weight. So if you were 150 kilos and now you're 75 kilos, without changing your actual cardiovascular fitness, you've just doubled your VO2 max. And that makes sense because if you're no longer carrying around an extra 75 kilograms. If you walk around carrying 75 extra kilograms all day, I think you'd find that your heart rate goes up and that your cardiovascular system struggles to deal with that loaded movement all day. And if you put that weight down, then I think you'd find that your heart rate comes down and you're not puffing as much. So optimal training is usually fairly moderate stuff for a long time and having a healthy body weight. Now, that guy who improved his cardiovascular fitness 40%, the example given was a guy who had fairly average VO2 max for a healthy young guy in the 40s to begin with, and he improved it by 20 hours work over 3 years. I would question how many people are willing to do 20 hours of work over 3 years, and therefore how many people are willing and able to get optimal results. So you can see that yourself, being a normal person with a job and a spouse and, you know, a life outside the gym, doing 3 or so hours a week, the exact sets and reps training volume you do is not that important in comparison to the guy who does 20 hours a week for 3 years. It's just how much are you willing to give to the gym. This is the question that comes up again and again and again. And as for what's optimal in terms of training, well, here we have Mark Rivito, starting strength. He tells us what's optimal. Low bar, back, squat, press and deadlift. And in the second workout, low bar, back, squat, bench press, and something else like a power clean. 3 sets of 5, or in the case of the deadlift, 1 set of 5, and the power clean, 5 sets of 3. Add weight to the bar each time. Do that for 3 to 6 months. After that, it becomes more complicated. Then John Sullivan tells us, well, unless you're over 50 and you've got health issues, then you might need something slightly different, but not substantially different, but slightly different. Maybe you need to do high bar squat because your 50-year-old shoulders can't get in a low bar squat position, and, well, a whole bunch of other stuff. Marty Gallagher offers a more nuanced, roundabout approach with a whole lot of storytelling, some images of some big-assed, roided-up bodybuilders, and so on. And Marty doesn't really care if you do a low bar or a high bar squat, but you've got to do some sort of squat. Unless you leg press but do shitloads of reps, he's happy with that too. Then, this textbook, The Essentials of Strength and Conditioning, tells us about the classic 3 sets of 8 to 12, and breathe in as you go down and breathe out as you go up. Try doing that while you're deadlifting 150 kilos. And they have lots of reasoning and pages and pictures of hearts and all sorts for that too. And then of course, Dr. Phil Maffetoni, he's not too much worried about how much you bench, but he's extremely concerned with your endurance and how you should train that. And so on. There are other books I've got from right back into the 19th century, and they all have a different approach about what's optimal. We, of course, have our own thoughts about ALPS, and that being optimal, all other things being equal. Just keep training, Jones. Just keep training, and without being stupid about it, and eating good food, and adding a little bit of cardio, and good things will happen. There isn't really an optimal training volume for anyone. We do just feel it out with that individual, because we might sort of do the phrenology of the body that I was talking about before and measure things up and say, therefore, you should do 3 sets of 12. But him, he needs to do 3 sets of 10 because he's... And that guy 5 sets of 8 because he's totally different. We just feel it around because, as well, what is optimal for you today may not be optimal for you the week of your wedding, or when you're just coming back from having the swine flu, or when you're recovering from a knee reconstruction surgery, or when you're 40 instead of being 32, or whatever. We just have to feel it out. We know that some things work for everyone, doing some sort of squat, some sort of push, some sort of pull, some sort of hip hinge, some sort of loaded carry, adding weight to the bar on a regular basis. We know that works for everyone. The exact details, unfortunately, we usually have to muddle through. We know some things work well, some things don't work as well, except in certain cases. We have to, shit's just complicated, except you got to squat. Jones also asks, is there a spillover effect between legs and upper body exercises? For example, squats helping bench press, in the same way how like overhead press helps bench press. This is an old argument between the bros, where the first bro says, I just curl, and that gives me my big biceps. And the second bro says, bro, if you squat and curl, there's a hormonal release when you squat, and then that gives you bigger biceps because of the hormonal release. This has in fact been studied, believe it or not. They got one bunch of bros to just curl, another bunch of bros to squat and curl, and then they waited 12 weeks of squatting and or squatting, of curling and or squatting and curling to see who got bigger biceps. And they found that it made no difference whatsoever whether they squatted or not. Because the biceps aren't involved much in the squat, whereas the muscles involved in the overhead press are involved in the bench press. So the hormonal effect was neither here nor there. When they measure it, when they take blood samples out of you, you do in fact have a little surge of testosterone when you do heavy squats, a surge that you just don't get if you do curls. But it doesn't seem to have a long-term effect and lead to bigger biceps. Now the researchers, when they did this, they said, and yet the observation is that in gyms, guys who squat and curl do have bigger biceps than guys who just curl. Why might this be if there isn't a hormonal thing and if it didn't show up in our study? And the suggestion they came up with was the sort of guy who squats is willing to push themselves hard. The sort of guy who avoids squats is not. In other words, the guy who squats and curls probably curls a lot harder, does a lot more reps and a lot more weight, and pushes himself harder than the guy who just curls. So the old argument of hormones is probably better thought of in terms of mental toughness. Are you the sort of person who can just grind out bloody hard reps? If you are, you're going to get some gains. Or are you the sort of person who says, squats are bad for the knees? Or I did that. I used to do low bar and then it wrecked my back. It's just terrible. You're probably not going to get much biceps gains if you're that guy or that woman. Seems to be mostly about mental toughness. Yeah, so that was the answer. The number of, there was a study of squats and curls and biceps, and the answer is, doesn't make any difference, except maybe psychological. People who are willing to push themselves harder and more consistently for longer will get better results. The hormonal thing seems to be neither here nor there in terms of overall body results. But overhead press helps bench press because there are similar muscles involved. And it's the same but different movement, just like front squats help back squats, and Romanian deadlifts help conventional deadlifts, and so on and so forth. Doing a same but different exercise helps that different one. All right, rant of the week. Drugs. We were discussing this today. Someone asked, would you train somebody who was taking anabolic steroids? My answer was, yes, if they were doing so under the supervision of a medical professional. My reasoning here is, I do not give a damn about the morality of drugs, okay? We all take performance-enhancing drugs. We all drink coffee. Keeps us awake during the day. Many of us will have an alcoholic drink when we go on the date because it relaxes us and our date looks more attractive through the bottom of a glass. Corporate lawyers and the like take amphetamines to keep them awake so they can do their 16 hours of unpaid overtime a day. University students will do likewise. Tiger Woods had his vision laser corrected to better than 20/20. That's quite legal. It is not legal to take EPO to increase your red blood cell count, but it is legal to do altitude training, which increases your red blood cell count. Oh, but that requires effort. Well, yes, altitude training does require effort, but you can also get a low air pressure chamber and sleep in it, which also increases your red blood cell count and involves no bloody effort at all. That is legal. Go to the doctor and you say, I want bigger breasts. No problem, stick silicone in. I don't like my wrinkles. No worries. We'll inject a paralyzing poison into your head. That will have no long-term effects whatsoever. I don't like my nose. Yeah, that's all right. We'll fix it with surgery. I want bigger biceps. Fuck you. Get out of my office. This makes no sense at all. Oh, but it's about competition fairness. No! The Australian Institute of Sport has a budget of $500,000 annually per athlete. They have sports physiotherapists. Slightest twinge, you're off to them, and ultrasound within 10 minutes to check what's happening in that joint. They have an MRI there. They have sports nutritionists who can adjust your protein or your intake up and down 5 grams if necessary. They have sports physicians. They have masseurs. You can do a set of squats and get a massage in between sets of squats. They have computer-assisted gait analysis. They have all this. $500,000 per athlete annually, compared to that guy in Cameroon who's doing snatches on old floorboards out in the mud. Isn't that a performance-enhancing advantage, that $500,000 an athlete? It bloody well better be. Otherwise, I think Aussies should get our $300 million a year back. Thanks very much. And you can close the damn thing. Bloody well better be a performance-enhancing advantage. So, how come that's all right, but that little dude from Cameroon puts in 250 milligrams a week and, oh, evil bastard. It makes no sense at all. More importantly, anabolic steroids have a genuine medical use. That is what they were originally investigated for. People like burns victims who are bedridden for a long time. Chemotherapy patients who lose a lot of lean mass during their treatment period. It can assist in recovering all kinds of muscle and ligament damage after operations and so on. Older folk who've lost muscle mass. Can't grandpa get a jab in the arse from time to time to, help him with his gains or help him with his everyday life so he doesn't need a walking frame? And it can't be because we're worried about oldies taking too many drugs. Go into any nursing home and ask them what their medication is, and they'll pull out a box with 10 to 20 different drugs they take every day. And we're worried about their health. What, all those drugs don't interact, so we couldn't possibly give you some testosterone. That would be, or human growth hormone or something. That would be awful. So, our neurosis about so-called fairness of sport. I mean, the purpose of sport is to demonstrate unfairness. Our neurosis about sport is preventing genuine medical use for genuine medical need. But even if it's purely for vanity, well, we have a whole lot of the medical industry devoted to people's vanity, so I don't see why bigger biceps should be any different. But this shit is not necessarily safe. There may be some safe dosage, but it is not well studied because of our neurosis about sport. It should be well studied, so it can be well established what is a safe dosage. So if you are taking anabolic steroids under medical supervision, I don't have a problem with it at all. If it is not under medical supervision, oh yeah, but my bro in the gym said it was, and he sold me this vial made in the finest Mexican bathtub. It's good stuff, man. And it's safe. I've done my research. I've done my research into knees. You want an arthroscopy? I've got my pocket knife here somewhere. No! Don't be stupid. If your doctor gives it to you, fine. If not, don't be stupid. Don't mess with your system. But it should be legal and it should be stopped. That is my rant of the week. So, remember, tell us if you want to see some more stuff about ALPS. Like, comment on, and share this video so we can spread the wisdom. Because remember, there are many, many ways to do things. I've told you one way. It is the right way. If you do it otherwise, you're wrong, and strong is not for you. Good night.